The strange thing about my husband's funeral wasn't the silence. It was the whisper. I was standing beside Robert King's casket, trying to breathe through the kind of grief that makes your chest feel hollow when my 11-year-old grandson, Lucas, slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. He didn't look at me. He just whispered barely loud enough for me to hear Grandpa told me to give this to you, if he didn't wake up. When I opened the note, my hand started shaking, because the first line said, "Grandma, don't trust Dad." And by the time the sun rose the next morning, I would discover that my husband had been right to warn me. But before I tell you what happened that night, I want to ask you something. If you enjoy emotional stories about family secrets and the moments that change a life forever, take a second to like the video and subscribe, so you don't miss the next story. And I'm curious about something while you're here. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Also tell me in the comments, if someone in your family left you a note like that at a funeral, would you believe it? Because I almost didn't. And that nearly cost me everything. The paper felt impossibly light in my hand, yet somehow it weighed more than the casket in front of me. I folded the note again quickly and slipped it into the inside pocket of my purse before anyone could notice. My fingers trembled as I pressed the clasp shut. Mom Daniel's voice came from behind me. I turned slowly. My son stood a few feet away, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his expression carefully arranged somewhere between grief and control. Daniel had always been good at looking composed in public. Even as a boy, he could turn his emotions on and off like a switch. "You should sit down," he said, gently placing a hand on my elbow. "You've been standing a long time." I nodded weakly. Part of it wasn't an act. Losing Robert after 42 years together had left me feeling like someone had removed half the air from the world. Everything sounded distant, like voices underwater, but another part of me had suddenly become very alert, because the words on that piece of paper kept echoing inside my head. "Don't trust Dad. Lucas's father, Daniel." My son guided me to the front pew, and I sat down slowly. Around us, the funeral home smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood. People filled the rows behind me. Friends, neighbors, Robert's business partners. I barely recognized their faces. My attention kept drifting back to the small, folded note hidden in my purse. Robert told Lucas to give this to me if he didn't wake up. That thought made my stomach tighten. Robert hadn't been sick in the way people expected someone to die suddenly. Yes, he had heart problems over the past year. Yes, the doctors had warned him to slow down. But 3 days ago, he had been sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, arguing with me about the Cubs' chances this season. And now, he was lying in a mahogany casket at a funeral home on the north side of Chicago. Mom. This time it was Laura. My daughter leaned down beside me, her blonde hair pulled back into a tight knot, her face pale but dry. Laura had always been the practical one, the organized one. Even now, she carried a small leather notebook where she'd written out the entire schedule for the funeral. "You're doing okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," I said automatically. She glanced at my purse. "You still have your phone, right?" The question struck me as odd. "Yes." "And Dad's house keys?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Good, just making sure." Before I could ask why, someone behind us cleared their throat. The minister stepped toward the podium and the room fell quiet. The service began. I tried to listen. Truly I did. The minister spoke about Robert's generosity about the construction company he built from nothing, about the way he coached Daniel's Little League team for 6 straight summers, even while working 14-hour days. But the words drifted past me. Instead, I noticed things. Small things. Daniel kept glancing at his watch. Margaret, Daniel's wife, sat 2 rows behind me, leaning forward slightly, her eyes moving back and forth between Laura and Daniel like she was following a silent conversation. Laura's husband, Ethan Parker, sat stiffly with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. Every now and then, the 3 of them would exchange quick looks. Not sad looks, nervous ones. Something cold slid down my spine. Maybe grief was making me paranoid, I told myself. Families were awkward at funerals. People didn't know where to stand or what to say. Everyone felt uncomfortable. That was normal. But then I noticed something else. Every time I shifted in my seat or opened my purse for a tissue, Daniel's eyes moved immediately to my hands, like he was watching what I might take out or what I might read. I pressed my lips together. The note burned in my memory. Don't trust Dad. The service ended 40 minutes later. People began standing, forming a slow line to approach the casket one last time before we left for the cemetery. Daniel stepped beside me again. "Mom, why don't we go first?" he said. "It'll be easier before the line gets long." I nodded. We walked together toward Robert. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The funeral home, the people, the whispers. I reached out and touched the edge of the casket. Robert looked peaceful, too peaceful. The funeral director had done a careful job. His gray hair was combed neatly, his favorite navy tie straight against his shirt. But something about the stillness felt wrong. Robert had never been still a day in his life. Mom Daniel's hand tightened on my shoulder. "We should head outside soon. The cars are waiting." "Of course," I said softly. As we turned away, I caught sight of Lucas standing near the back of the room. He was staring at me. When our eyes met, he quickly looked down at the floor, the same way he had after giving me the note. A knot formed in my chest. After the service, the family gathered near the front entrance while the funeral staff organized the procession to the cemetery. Daniel stayed close to me, too close. After the burial, he said quietly, "Why don't you come stay at our place for a few days? That's not necessary. It might be easier," he insisted. "You shouldn't be alone right now." Laura stepped forward. "I agree with Daniel," she said gently. "You shouldn't go back to that big house by yourself tonight." Margaret nodded behind them. "We've already made up the guest room." Already the words stuck in my mind. I hadn't told anyone where I planned to stay. "Thank you," I said carefully, "but I think I'd rather sleep in my own bed." Daniel frowned. "It's not safe, Mom. Not safe." The phrase sounded strange. "Why wouldn't it be safe?" He hesitated. "For emotional reasons," he said finally. Laura laughed softly like she was smoothing things over. "He just means it'll be lonely." Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped away to answer it. Laura leaned closer to me. "Do you still have Dad's office keys?" she asked. I blinked. "Yes." "Good," she said again, the same word she'd used earlier. Then she glanced toward Daniel before stepping back. The procession began forming outside. Black cars lined the street under a gray Chicago sky. As we moved toward the door, my hand slipped quietly into my purse. I touched the folded note again. "Grandma, don't trust Dad. Don't go home with them tonight. Call Mr. Bennett." The name echoed in my mind. Arthur Bennett, Robert's old friend, his lawyer. I hadn't spoken to Arthur in years, but if Robert had trusted him enough to send me this message, then maybe I should listen. At the cemetery after the burial, people would be distracted, talking, hugging, remembering Robert. That might be my only chance, to make a call without Daniel or Laura listening. I took a slow breath as we stepped outside into the cold air, because for the first time since Robert died, I had the unmistakable feeling that something was terribly wrong. And whatever my husband had discovered before he died, it had been serious enough for him to trust an 11-year-old boy with a warning. The wind at the cemetery cut through my coat like a thin blade. Chicago in late October had a way of reminding you that warmth never lasted long. Black cars lined the gravel road as people stepped out quietly, their shoes crunching over fallen leaves. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down over the rows of headstones that stretched across the hill. Robert always hated cold funerals. I almost laughed at the thought. "Guess you didn't get much say in this one," I murmured under my breath. Daniel opened the car door for me. "Careful, Mom." He offered his arm like he had at the funeral home. Again, I let him guide me, leaning just enough to appear weak. It wasn't difficult. Grief had hollowed out my strength, but inside my purse, the folded note felt like a small electric current against my fingertips. "Don't trust Dad. Call Mr. Bennett. Arthur Bennett." The name kept circling in my mind. Robert had worked with Arthur for decades. The two of them met when Robert was barely 30, when his construction company was nothing more than a rented truck and 2 borrowed ladders. Arthur handled every contract, every expansion, every legal dispute that followed. But over the past few years, Daniel had started taking over more of the business side. I saw Arthur less often. In fact, now that I thought about it, Daniel usually handled the meetings with him, which meant Daniel probably didn't know Robert and Arthur still spoke privately. That thought made my stomach tighten. The funeral director guided us to the gravesite. Chairs were arranged in neat rows on the damp grass, and a green canopy stretched over the open grave. Robert's casket rested on a metal frame above the ground. For a moment, everything went quiet again. The minister spoke softly, finishing the final prayer. I barely heard the words. My attention drifted across the crowd. Daniel stood to my left, hands clasped in front of him, staring straight ahead. Margaret stood beside him, one hand on his arm. Laura and Ethan stood on my right. Ethan looked restless. He checked his watch twice during the short service. That bothered me more than I expected. Then I noticed something else. Lucas wasn't standing with his parents. He was a few steps behind them, near the back of the group, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, and he was watching me. The same worried expression from earlier still sat on his small face. I gave him the slightest nod, just enough for him to know I had read the note. His shoulders relaxed a little. The minister finished speaking. People stepped forward one by one, dropping flowers into the grave. When it was my turn, my knees nearly buckled. 42 years. 42 years of shared mornings, shared arguments, shared dreams about the future, and now the future had vanished. I dropped a white rose onto the casket. "Goodbye, Robert," I whispered. My voice broke. Daniel stepped forward quickly and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "It's okay, Mom." I leaned against him. From the outside, it probably looked like a grieving son comforting his mother, but inside my head, one thought kept repeating. Don't trust Dad. Don't trust Dad. Don't trust Dad. The burial ended soon after. People slowly began drifting toward the reception area at a nearby community hall where coffee and food had been prepared. Daniel stayed glued to my side. "You should ride with me," he said as we walked toward the cars. "I actually promised Mrs. Carter I'd say goodbye to her first," I said gently. Mrs. Carter was an old neighbor who had known Robert since the early days of the company. Daniel hesitated. "I won't be long," I added. He nodded reluctantly. "All right, but don't wander off too far." "Mom," I forced a small smile. "I won't." Daniel walked toward the parking area with Margaret. Laura and Ethan followed behind them. I waited. 10 seconds, 20, 30, then I turned in the opposite direction. Mrs. Carter was standing near a cluster of people by the cemetery gate. I walked over and hugged her, listening politely as she shared memories of Robert, but my eyes kept drifting toward the parking lot. Daniel was busy speaking with one of Robert's former business partners. "Good." I excused myself. "Would you mind if I borrowed your phone for a moment?" I asked Mrs. Carter quietly. "Mine died earlier." "Of course, dear." She handed it over without hesitation. My hands trembled slightly as I stepped a few yards away and dialed the number that had been printed on Robert's business cards for years. Arthur Bennett. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I almost hung up. Then a calm, familiar voice answered. Arthur Bennett speaking. For a moment I couldn't speak. "Hello," he said again. "It's Christine." There was a pause. Then his voice changed instantly. "Christine, are you all right? I just came from the funeral." "I know," he said quietly. "You know." "Yes." My heart began beating faster. Robert told him something serious. "I received a message from Robert," I said carefully. "A note he left with Lucas." Arthur inhaled slowly. "So he did it." "Did what?" He prepared a backup. A cold chill spread through my chest. "Arthur," I whispered, "what did Robert think was happening?" For a few seconds the line was silent, except for the faint sound of traffic in the background. When Arthur finally spoke again, his voice was firm. "Christine, listen to me very carefully." I gripped the phone tighter. "Robert came to see me 3 days before he died. What?" "He was worried," Arthur continued, "deeply worried, about what he believed someone was trying to rush him into signing certain documents." My pulse pounded in my ears. "What kind of documents?" Arthur hesitated. "I'd rather explain that in person." "Arthur, there's more." A long pause filled the line. "Your husband told me something very specific that day," Arthur said slowly. "What?" "He said that if anything happened to him suddenly, you might be in danger of being pressured." My mouth went dry, pressured to do what sign things you don't fully understand. My eyes drifted toward the parking lot again. Daniel was still talking, but now Laura had joined him. Both of them were looking around, searching. Christine Arthur said firmly, "Where are you right now?" "At the cemetery." "Good, I need you to do something for me." "What? Act normal. I think I can manage that." "Do not confront anyone," he continued. "Not yet." "All right, and whatever you do, do not sign any paperwork tonight." My heart skipped. "Tonight they're planning something tonight?" I asked. "I don't know that for certain," Arthur replied carefully, but Robert was very clear about one thing. "What if you called me?" It meant his fears weren't unfounded. The wind swept across the cemetery again, rustling the leaves around my feet. "What should I do?" I whispered. Arthur's answer came without hesitation. "Meet me tonight, where I'll text you the location." Another pause. Then he added quietly, "And Christine, yes, whatever you do, do not go home with Daniel." My breath caught because that was exactly what the note in my purse had said. For a moment I couldn't move. Arthur's last words echoed in my ears while the wind carried the distant sound of car doors closing behind me. "Do not go home with Daniel." The exact same warning that Robert had written in the note Lucas slipped into my hand. My fingers tightened around Mrs. Carter's phone. Christine Arthur said gently, "Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "You need to stay calm. Nothing has happened yet I don't want to jump to conclusions." But Robert didn't come to me lightly. He was deeply unsettled. My eyes drifted toward the parking lot again. Daniel and Laura were no longer talking to the business partner. Now they were both scanning the cemetery, looking for me. "I think they're already looking for me," I murmured. "That's all right," Arthur said calmly. "Finish the funeral. Act exactly the way you normally would. And tonight we meet. I'll text you an address. What is it, a diner not far from your house?" "Quiet place. Nobody from the family goes there," I swallowed. "Arthur, what exactly did Robert leave with you?" There was a pause. "An envelope," he said finally, "and instructions." "What kind of instructions?" "Instructions that I was not to open it unless you contacted me first." My heart pounded harder, and if I hadn't called, then I would have waited. For how long? Robert said a week. A week. Which meant if Lucas hadn't given me that note, if I'd simply gone home with Daniel like they expected, Arthur would have remained silent. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. "I'll see you tonight," Arthur said quietly. Then he hung up. I stood there for several seconds staring at the dark screen of Mrs. Carter's phone. My reflection stared back at me faintly, pale, tired. Older than I remembered feeling yesterday. I took a long breath and walked back toward the group. Daniel spotted me immediately. "Mom," he said, walking quickly toward me. "Where did you go?" "I was speaking with Mrs. Carter. You had us worried." I forced a faint smile. "I'm not going anywhere." Laura joined us a moment later. "We're about to head to the reception hall," she said. "Everyone's already leaving." "All right." Daniel studied my face carefully. "You look exhausted." "I feel exhausted." "You should ride with us," he said. "You shouldn't drive today." "That's kind of you," I said softly. But I shook my head. "I'd like a little time alone." Daniel frowned. "Mom, I'll meet you there," I said gently. He hesitated, clearly debating whether to push the issue. Margaret stepped forward. "Let her breathe, Daniel." She gave me a sympathetic look. "Grief is different for everyone." "Exactly," I said. Daniel finally nodded. "All right. But promise you'll come straight to the hall." "I promise." It wasn't technically a lie. I would go there, eventually. They walked toward their car. I watched them carefully. Laura leaned close to Daniel as they walked. They were talking quickly. Margaret opened the passenger door. Ethan stood beside the car, scrolling through his phone. None of them looked relaxed. They looked tense. The kind of tension people carry when they're waiting for something important to happen or not happen. My car sat near the edge of the gravel lot, Robert's old silver sedan. He loved that car. Said it reminded him of the first vehicle he bought when the company finally turned a profit. I slid into the driver's seat. For a moment, I just sat there. The empty passenger seat beside me felt impossibly large. Robert should have been sitting there, complaining about how long funerals took, making some quiet joke to make me smile. Instead, the silence pressed in from every direction. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, a memory surfaced. 3 nights ago. Robert standing in the kitchen after midnight, the house dark except for the small light above the stove. He had been staring at the table like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Christine," he said softly. "Yes, if something ever happened to me." I laughed. "Robert, you're not going anywhere." But he hadn't laughed back. "Promise me something." "What, promise me you won't let anyone rush you into decisions?" I frowned. "What decisions?" He opened his mouth like he was about to explain. Then Daniel walked into the kitchen, and the moment disappeared. At the time, I assumed Robert had simply been tired. Now the memory made my chest tighten. He had been trying to warn me. I started the car. The engine hummed quietly to life. Most of the funeral procession had already left for the reception hall. I pulled onto the road slowly. The gray sky hung low above the Chicago suburbs as I drove. For the first few minutes, I followed the other cars toward the hall. Then I noticed something strange. Daniel's SUV slowed down ahead of me. Then it pulled to the side of the road. I passed them carefully. Daniel looked up as I drove by. Our eyes met through the windshield. His expression was unreadable. But he lifted his hand and waved. I waved back. Then I continued driving. 5 minutes later, I turned into the parking lot of the reception hall. People were already gathering near the entrance. The smell of coffee drifted through the air. Inside, long tables held trays of sandwiches, pastries, and small plates of food. Soft music played quietly in the background. I moved slowly through the room as people approached me. Friends, neighbors, old colleagues of Robert's. Each one offered the same gentle words. "I'm so sorry. He was a wonderful man. You must be so proud of everything he built." I thanked them politely, but my mind wasn't there. Every few minutes, my hand drifted to my purse, touching the folded note. "Don't trust Dad. Don't go home with them tonight. Call Mr. Bennett." I spotted Lucas standing near the far wall beside a table of cookies. He looked up when he saw me. I walked over slowly. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "Hi, Grandma." He glanced toward the other side of the room where Daniel was speaking with several business partners. Then he leaned closer. "Did you read it, yes?" His shoulders dropped slightly in relief. "Grandpa said you would understand." "What did he tell you exactly?" Lucas hesitated. "He said if he ever got really sick, and if Dad started asking you to sign things." My heart skipped. "Then I should give you that note." I looked at him carefully. "Did you hear anything else?" Lucas bit his lip. "I heard Dad yelling at Grandpa once. What about he wanted him to sign some papers?" And Grandpa Lucas shook his head. He said no. A chill crept through my chest, because across the room, Daniel had just turned around, and he was watching us. Not casually, carefully. Like he was trying to read our lips from across the room. Lucas followed my gaze. Then he whispered one last thing. "Grandpa said, if you called Mr. Bennett..." Yes, everything would change by morning. Lucas's words lingered in the air long after he stopped speaking. Everything would change by morning. I looked down at him carefully. His small hands were gripping the edge of the cookie table, and he kept glancing across the room where Daniel was still watching us. For an 11-year-old boy, Lucas was trying very hard to look calm, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "Sweetheart," I said, gently lowering my voice. "Did Grandpa tell you anything else?" Lucas hesitated. "Not really," he said slowly. "He just said if Dad started talking about papers, or if you looked scared, I should give you the note." My chest tightened. Robert had been planning this, not in panic, not in confusion, but carefully, thoughtfully. He had chosen Lucas for a reason. Because adults talk freely around children. They assume children don't understand. "Thank you for giving it to me," I whispered. Lucas nodded, then glanced over my shoulder again. "Grandma." "Yes." "You're not mad at me, right?" The question startled me. "Of course not," I said immediately. "But Dad might be," he whispered. My heart sank. I crouched slightly so we were eye level. "Lucas, listen to me," I said softly. "You did exactly what Grandpa asked you to do." His shoulders relaxed a little. "Okay." I squeezed his hand once before standing up. Across the room, Daniel had finished speaking with the group of men. He started walking toward us. Lucas noticed too. "I should go," he murmured quickly before slipping away toward the other children near the back of the hall. Daniel reached me a few seconds later. "What were you two talking about?" he asked casually. "Oh," I said lightly, "Lucas was asking about Robert's old fishing trips." Daniel studied my face. Fishing trips, yes, the ones up in Wisconsin. Daniel forced a small smile. Dad did love those. But his eyes drifted briefly toward Lucas, who was now standing with Margaret near the dessert table. Something about Daniel's expression made my stomach tighten. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. "You look tired," Daniel said again. "Maybe we should leave soon." "I'm all right. You shouldn't push yourself. I won't." Daniel sighed quietly. "Mom, I know today has been overwhelming. That's why I think it would really be best if you stayed with us tonight." There it was again. Tonight. I kept my expression soft. "That's very thoughtful. It's practical," he said. "The house is huge. Being there alone right now, it's not good for you. I've lived in that house for 30 years. That's exactly my point." What point? Daniel hesitated. That everything in that house will remind you of Dad. For a brief moment, the logic almost made sense. Almost. But then I remembered Arthur's voice on the phone. "Do not go home with Daniel." Maybe I said carefully, but sometimes memories are exactly what we need. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Laura appeared beside him. "I agree with Daniel," she said gently. "You shouldn't be by yourself tonight." Her husband Ethan joined them a moment later. "You've had a long day," he added. I looked at the three of them standing there together. United, encouraging, concerned. If I hadn't read Robert's note, if I hadn't spoken to Arthur, I might have believed them. Instead, something else caught my attention. Margaret was walking toward us now, and she was carrying my purse. My heart skipped. "I found this on the chair you were sitting in earlier," she said brightly. She handed it to me. I accepted it slowly. "Thank you." Margaret smiled warmly. "You really should let us take care of you tonight." My fingers tightened around the purse strap. For a split second, I wondered if she had opened it, if she had seen the folded note inside. But her expression gave nothing away. "Actually," Daniel said suddenly, "there's something we should talk about." My stomach tightened again. "What is it?" Just a few small things regarding Dad's affairs. I felt the air grow heavier around me. "What kind of things? Nothing complicated," Daniel said quickly. "Just paperwork." The word hit me like a small hammer. Paperwork. Lucas's warning echoed in my mind. If Dad starts talking about papers— "Your father handled most of the business matters," Daniel continued, "but now that he's gone, we need to make sure everything transitions smoothly." Laura nodded. "It's just a formality." "Exactly," Ethan added. I looked at each of them carefully. Daniel, Laura, Ethan, Margaret, all four watching me, waiting. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. Daniel smiled reassuringly. "Temporary management documents for the company." "Yes, so the projects don't stall," Ethan said quickly. "It's really just to keep things running while we sort out the estate," Laura added. Their explanations overlapped slightly, almost rehearsed. "And you want me to sign them tonight?" I asked. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Well, yes." My pulse quickened. Arthur's warning thundered in my mind. "Do not sign anything tonight." I lowered my eyes briefly like I was thinking. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "It's very simple," Daniel insisted. Mom Laura said softly Dad would want the company protected. That sentence nearly broke my composure, because Robert would never pressure me like this. Never. I think I said slowly that anything important can wait until tomorrow. Daniel's expression tightened. Tomorrow might be too late. The words slipped out before he could stop them. A long silence followed. Too late for what I asked quietly. Daniel quickly recovered. Too late for certain deadlines. "What deadlines?" "The bank," Ethan said. "The investors," Laura added. Their answers came too quickly. I shook my head gently. "I'm sorry. I just can't make decisions like that today." Daniel looked frustrated now. "Mom, tomorrow," I repeated softly. Margaret stepped in smoothly. "Christine is right," she said, placing a calming hand on Daniel's arm. "Today has been overwhelming." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Fine," he said. But the words sounded forced. I could see disappointment flicker across Ethan's face. Laura avoided my eyes, and in that moment, I understood something important. They had expected me to say yes, not hesitate, not delay, yes, which meant whatever they wanted signed. It mattered a lot. The reception slowly began winding down as people started leaving. Daniel checked his watch again. "All right," he said finally. "Let's head home." He looked at me. "Are you coming with us?" Every muscle in my body tensed. Arthur's words echoed again. "Do not go home with Daniel." I forced a tired smile. "I think I'll go back to the house for a little while." Daniel frowned. "You sure?" "Yes. You shouldn't be alone." "I won't be alone," I said softly. I looked around the hall. "Your father's memories will be there." Daniel studied my face for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. "All right." But as he turned away, I noticed something unsettling. He leaned close to Ethan, whispered something. Ethan's expression darkened immediately, and for the first time all day, I felt a quiet, unmistakable certainty settle inside my chest. Whatever Robert had discovered before he died, it had terrified him enough to prepare a warning, and whatever Daniel wanted me to sign tonight, he needed it badly. Which meant Arthur was right. Tonight mattered. And somewhere between sunset and dawn, the truth about my husband's death was waiting to be uncovered. The reception ended slowly, like the last fading notes of a sad song. People drifted toward the doors in small groups, their voices low and respectful. A few stopped to hug me one last time. Others simply squeezed my hand before stepping out into the cool evening air. Eventually, the room grew quiet. Daniel, Laura, Ethan, and Margaret were gathering their coats near the entrance. I watched them carefully. Daniel looked irritated. Laura looked nervous. Ethan looked impatient. Margaret looked observant, like she was waiting to see what I would do next. "Mom," Daniel said as he walked back toward me. "We're heading out," I nodded. "Drive safely." "You too," he replied. There was a pause. "You're sure you don't want to stay with us tonight?" "No." "You could change your mind." "I won't." Daniel studied my face one more time. Then he sighed. "All right." But the words sounded forced again. Laura hugged me quickly. "Call us if you need anything." "I will." Ethan gave a short nod. Margaret offered a sympathetic smile. Then they left together. I stood by the window as their SUV pulled out of the parking lot. For several seconds, I simply watched the empty road. Then I checked my phone. A message had arrived. Arthur Bennett. The address appeared on the screen. Marlowe's Diner, 9:30 p.m. It was a small place, about 15 minutes from my house. Robert used to stop there occasionally after late meetings. Daniel never liked it. Said the place looked run down, which meant Arthur had chosen it for a reason. I slipped the phone back into my purse and walked outside. The air had grown colder since the afternoon. Chicago evenings in October could feel like winter if the wind picked up. My car sat alone near the far end of the parking lot. For a moment, I simply stood there looking at it. Robert had driven that car for nearly 10 years. He refused to replace it. "Still runs perfectly," he used to say. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather smelled faintly like him. My chest tightened. For a moment, grief washed over me so strongly I had to close my eyes. I missed him. God, I missed him. But beneath the grief, another feeling was growing. Unease. The same uneasy feeling that had been building all day. I started the engine. The drive home was quiet. Streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over the suburbs. Cars passed occasionally, headlights cutting through the dim light. My mind drifted back to the past few months. At first the memories came slowly, then faster, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. Daniel had started visiting the house more often. At the time, I thought it was sweet. He said he wanted to spend more time with Robert. But those visits often ended with closed-door conversations in Robert's study. Laura and Ethan had also been coming around more frequently, especially Ethan. He had begun asking Robert questions about the company, about ownership, about contracts. At the time, I assumed he was simply curious. Now those conversations felt different, more pointed, more strategic. I turned onto our street. The house appeared at the end of the block, large, quiet, dark. The same house Robert and I had built together 30 years ago. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment before getting out. The porch light flickered on as I opened the front door. The familiar smell of the house wrapped around me instantly. Coffee, wood polish, Robert's old leather chair. For a moment, the silence inside felt overwhelming. Then I stepped inside and closed the door. "Hello," I called softly out of habit. Of course, no one answered. I placed my purse on the hallway table and walked slowly into the living room. Everything looked exactly the same. Robert's reading glasses still rested on the coffee table beside the newspaper he had been reading 2 days ago. His favorite blanket was folded over the arm of his chair. I sat down slowly. The house creaked softly around me. Normally the sound felt comforting. Tonight it felt different, like the house itself had secrets. My eyes drifted toward the hallway leading to Robert's study. Arthur's words echoed in my mind. Your husband believes someone was rushing him into signing certain documents. I stood up. The study door was slightly open. That immediately struck me as odd. Robert always closed it when he finished working. Always. I walked down the hallway slowly. The wooden floor creaked under my steps. When I reached the doorway, I paused. The room looked mostly normal. Bookshelves, desk, file cabinets. Robert's desk lamp still sat exactly where he left it. But something felt wrong. I stepped inside, and then I saw it. The bottom drawer of the desk was slightly open, just a few inches. Robert was obsessive about organization. He closed every drawer completely, every time. I knelt down slowly and pulled the drawer open. The folders inside had been moved, not dramatically, just enough that the neat rows Robert kept were slightly uneven. Someone had searched through them. My heart started beating faster. I opened the top folder, then the second, then the third. Most of the documents were still there. Contracts, invoices, property records, but one space in the row was empty. Something had been removed. I sat back slowly on my heels. Daniel had been in this house yesterday, helping organize things. Laura had also stopped by briefly. And Ethan. Ethan had wandered into the study while Daniel and I were talking in the kitchen. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now the memory made my stomach twist. Someone had been looking for something, or taking something. I closed the drawer carefully, then I stood up and walked to Robert's desk. His chair still faced the window. I ran my hand over the back of it. "How much trouble were you in, Robert?" I whispered. My eyes drifted to the small framed photo on the desk. It was taken during a fishing trip years ago. Robert and Lucas standing beside the lake, both of them smiling proudly while holding a tiny fish between them. Lucas. Arthur had mentioned him earlier. Robert trusted him, enough to deliver that note, enough to warn me. A soft buzzing sound pulled me from my thoughts. My phone vibrated inside my purse. I pulled it out. Arthur had sent another message. Bring the note Robert left, and anything else you find unusual in the house. I looked around the study again. Something else you find unusual. My eyes returned to the desk, specifically the empty space where the missing folder had been. Whatever had been in that folder, someone had taken it. And judging by the way Daniel reacted earlier, they were running out of time. I checked the clock. 8:55 p.m., 35 minutes until I was supposed to meet Arthur. I took a deep breath, then I turned off the lights and walked toward the front door. Because tonight, for the first time since Robert died, I was about to learn what he had been trying so desperately to protect me from. I locked the front door behind me and stood on the porch for a moment, letting the cold night air clear my head. The street was quiet, too quiet. Most of the houses on our block had their lights on soft yellow squares glowing through curtains. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and then went silent. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. I glanced back through the front window of the house Robert and I had shared for 3 decades. The living room lamp still glowed faintly, casting long shadows across the empty floor. For the first time since we moved in, the house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place where something had happened, or something had been hidden. I slid into the car and started the engine. The clock on the dashboard read 9:02 p.m. Arthur had said 9:30. That gave me enough time. As I backed out of the driveway, my eyes drifted toward Daniel's house 3 streets over. All the lights were on. I couldn't see much from this distance, but the living room windows were bright. For a brief moment, I wondered what they were doing right now. Talking, planning, waiting. I turned the wheel and drove away. The diner sat on a quiet corner just off the main road, the kind of place people drove past without noticing. Marlowe's Diner. The neon sign buzzed faintly above the door, glowing red and blue against the dark sky. A few cars sat scattered in the parking lot. Nothing unusual. I parked near the far end and checked the time again. 9:26 p.m. Arthur was already inside. I could see him through the window. He sat alone in a booth near the back wall, his silver hair catching the soft yellow light above the table. He looked older than I remembered, but the moment I stepped inside, his eyes lifted and locked onto mine. He stood immediately. Christine. The relief in his voice was unmistakable. Arthur. He pulled out the seat across from him as I approached. You made it, yes. The waitress walked over and poured coffee into 2 mugs without asking. Arthur nodded politely. Thank you, Linda. She smiled and walked away. Arthur waited until she was out of earshot before leaning forward slightly. Did anyone follow you? The question startled me. I don't think so. You're sure I checked my mirrors most of the way? Arthur nodded slowly. Good. I slipped into the booth and placed my purse on the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached inside and pulled out the folded note Lucas had given me. This is what Robert left. Arthur took it carefully. His eyes scanned the short message. Then he nodded. Yes, what? This is exactly what he told me he wrote. My heart skipped. So you knew about the note. Not the exact wording, Arthur said. But Robert told me he was leaving a warning with Lucas. Why Lucas? Because Lucas was the only one in the house no one paid attention to. Arthur folded the note again and slid it back across the table. Children hear everything. I exhaled slowly. That's exactly what Lucas said. Arthur studied my face carefully. Christine, before we go any further, I need to ask you something. What did anyone ask you to sign anything today? The question made my stomach tighten. Yes. Arthur's expression darkened instantly. Who, Daniel? And he said it was temporary paperwork for the company. Arthur leaned back slowly in his seat. And did you sign it? No. A long breath escaped him. Thank God. The words sent a chill through my chest. Arthur, what exactly were those papers? He reached into the leather briefcase sitting beside him. I believe they were these. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it carefully on the table. Then he opened it. Inside were several printed documents. He slid the first page toward me. The title jumped out immediately. Emergency Authority Transfer Agreement. My pulse quickened. What is this? Arthur tapped the page. This document would temporarily transfer operational control of Robert King Construction to Daniel. That doesn't sound unusual. Look at paragraph 4. I leaned closer. The words blurred slightly until I focused. Then my breath caught. Because paragraph 4 stated that the temporary authority could not be revoked without approval from the acting director, which meant Daniel. That's not temporary, I whispered. No, Arthur said quietly. It's permanent control disguised as temporary protection. A cold wave of realization spread through my chest. They expected me to sign this tonight, yes, but Robert owned the company. Arthur shook his head. No. What not entirely, my heart pounded. What do you mean? Arthur opened another folder inside the envelope. He pulled out several documents and spread them across the table. These were signed 4 years ago. I stared down at them. Legal papers, property transfers, corporate ownership records. Then I saw my name. Christine Eleanor King, listed as primary controlling shareholder. My head snapped up. What? Arthur nodded calmly. Robert transferred the majority controlling interest of the company into a joint trust. A trust, yes. Why? To protect you. The words landed heavily between us. Protect me from what? Arthur folded his hands together. Robert began noticing certain behaviors from Daniel and Ethan about 2 years ago. What kind of behaviors? Financial pressure, questions about ownership, requests for early access to inheritance. I stared at him. Daniel would never. Arthur held up a hand gently. I'm not saying your son planned something terrible from the beginning, but people change when money enters the picture. My chest tightened painfully. Robert didn't want to believe it either. Arthur slid another document across the table. This is why he changed the structure. I looked down again. The document explained everything. If Robert died, operational control of the company did not automatically pass to Daniel. Instead, it required approval from the primary shareholder, which was me. My throat felt dry. So if I signed that document tonight, Daniel would gain permanent control, and I would lose it. Arthur nodded. Yes. I leaned back slowly in the booth. The diner suddenly felt very quiet. Too quiet. "Arthur," I said softly. "Yes, there's something else. What I went into Robert's study before coming here, and the bottom desk drawer had been opened." Arthur's expression sharpened instantly. "Was anything missing?" "Yes, what I'm not sure. But one folder was gone." Arthur leaned forward. "That's not good." "Why? Because Robert told me he kept copies of certain records in that drawer." "What kind of records?" Arthur hesitated. "The kind that proves someone in your family had already attempted to forge Robert's signature." The words made my stomach drop. "Who?" Arthur's voice lowered. "We're not certain yet." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I whispered the question that had been growing in my mind all evening. "Arthur, did Robert believe someone in this family tried to kill him?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his briefcase toward me and opened another compartment. Inside was a small black USB drive. He placed it gently on the table. "Robert believed someone was preparing to steal everything he built." My pulse hammered in my ears. "And this?" Arthur said quietly, "Tapping the flash drive contains the evidence he started collecting." The small black flash drive sat between us on the diner table, like something alive. I stared at it for several seconds. Robert had touched that. Robert had hidden that. Robert had trusted Arthur with that. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached toward it, but I stopped before actually picking it up. "What's on it?" I asked quietly. Arthur didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow sip of coffee and looked around the diner. 2 truck drivers sat at the counter near the kitchen window. A young couple occupied a booth by the entrance. The waitress wiped down another table near the door. No one was paying attention to us. Still, Arthur lowered his voice. "Your husband spent the last 6 weeks before his death documenting things he found suspicious. Suspicious how financial records, security footage, phone recordings." My heart skipped. "Recordings?" Arthur nodded. "Robert suspected someone was trying to pressure him into transferring control of the company." "That's what you said earlier." "Yes, but what he discovered went further than pressure." My throat tightened. How much further? Arthur slid the flash drive slightly closer to me, enough that he decided to start collecting evidence. The word evidence echoed uncomfortably. "What kind of evidence?" Arthur opened his briefcase again and pulled out a slim laptop. He set it on the table between us. "Let's see." My pulse quickened as he plugged the flash drive into the side port. The laptop screen lit up. A folder appeared. "RK files." Arthur clicked it. Inside were several video files, audio recordings, and scanned documents. My heart pounded harder with every second. "Robert organized everything carefully," Arthur said, "just like he did with his business records." Arthur opened the first video file. The screen flickered for a moment before showing the inside of our house, specifically Robert's study. I leaned forward in my seat. "That's the security camera above the bookshelf," I said. "Yes," Arthur replied. "Robert installed those cameras 2 years ago after someone tried to break into the house while we were on vacation." I watched as the timestamp appeared in the corner of the video, 3 weeks ago. The study door opened. Daniel walked inside. My breath caught. He looked around the room briefly before closing the door behind him. Then he walked straight to Robert's desk. My stomach twisted as he began opening drawers, searching. Arthur paused the video. Robert noticed this footage while reviewing the security recordings. Why was Daniel searching the desk? That's what Robert wanted to find out. Arthur opened the second video. This one showed the same room, but a different night, 2 weeks ago. The door opened again. Laura stepped inside this time. She looked nervous. She closed the door quietly and walked to the desk. Then she did something that made my chest tighten. She pulled a folder from the drawer, opened it, read something quickly, then placed it back exactly where she found it. Arthur paused the video again. "She didn't take anything," I said quietly. "No. But she was looking for something." "Yes." Arthur clicked another file. This time it was an audio recording. The screen stayed black as voices filled the small space of the diner booth. Robert's voice came first, calm but firm. "I told you already, I'm not signing that." Daniel's voice followed, frustrated. "You're being stubborn, Dad. I'm being careful. You're slowing everything down. What exactly am I slowing down?" A pause. Then Daniel again. "The expansion. The expansion doesn't require this paperwork. You wouldn't understand the details. I built this company. I understand every detail." Silence. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice lower. You're making things harder than they need to be. Arthur paused the recording. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That was recorded in the study, Arthur said. How Robert placed a small voice recorder inside the desk. I leaned back slowly. My mind struggled to process everything. Daniel searching the desk, Laura searching the desk, Daniel arguing with Robert about paperwork. What else is there? I asked quietly. Arthur opened another folder. This one contained scanned documents. He clicked the first image. My breath caught instantly. It was a contract, one I had seen before. The Emergency Authority Transfer Agreement, but something about the signature looked strange. Look closely, Arthur said. I leaned forward. The signature on the document read Robert King, but it looked slightly off. The lines were uneven, almost shaky. That's not Robert's handwriting, I whispered. Arthur nodded. That's what Robert said. My stomach dropped. Someone forged his signature, attempted to. Arthur said. Robert caught it before it was finalized. I felt a cold chill spread through my chest. Who did it? Arthur didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another document. This one was a pharmacy receipt. My eyebrows furrowed. What does this have to do with anything? Look at the date. I did. 4 days before Robert collapsed. What medication is this? I asked. Your husband's heart prescription. Yes, the dosage was doubled. My heart skipped. Robert never changed his dosage. Arthur nodded slowly. That's what he told me. Then who picked it up? Arthur scrolled down. At the bottom of the receipt was a signature line. The name written there made my chest tighten. Ethan Parker, Laura's husband. I felt the air leave my lungs. Why would Ethan pick up Robert's medication? That's exactly what Robert asked. Arthur opened one final video. This one showed the kitchen. The timestamp read the night before Robert was hospitalized. Robert stood near the table. Daniel stood across from him. Their voices were louder this time. You're paranoid, Daniel said. Robert replied calmly, I'm cautious. You're ruining this deal. What deal? The investors are ready. I don't care about investors. You should. I care about protecting my family. Daniel laughed bitterly. You're protecting yourself. Robert stepped closer. I'm protecting Christine. Arthur paused the video. The diner felt suddenly colder. Robert saved that file the morning he went to the hospital, Arthur said quietly. My chest ached. He knew something was wrong. He knew someone was trying to take control, and he tried to protect me. My voice felt barely steady as I asked the question that had been growing inside me all night. Arthur, do you think Daniel and Ethan tried to kill Robert? Arthur closed the laptop slowly. No, he said carefully. I don't believe they planned murder, but I do believe they were willing to manipulate him. My stomach twisted. Manipulate how Arthur tapped the pharmacy receipt again. If someone altered Robert's medication dosage, my heart pounded. His heart condition could have become unstable. The realization hit me like a wave. They didn't need to kill him directly. They only needed him weak, confused, vulnerable enough to sign something. I covered my mouth with my hand. Oh my God. Arthur looked at me seriously. Christine, what happened next depends on what we do now. I stared at the flash drive again. Robert's evidence. Robert's final protection. What do we do? I whispered. Arthur's voice was calm but firm. We make sure they never get the chance to finish what they started. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The hum of the diner filled the silence between us, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the low murmur of voices from the counter, the quiet buzz of the neon sign outside. But inside my head, everything was roaring. Daniel searching Robert's desk, Laura sneaking into the study, Ethan picking up the medication, and that argument in the kitchen the night before Robert collapsed. I pressed my hands flat against the table. They didn't kill him, I said slowly, almost like I was trying to convince myself. Arthur didn't interrupt. They just wanted him weak, I continued, weak enough to sign something. Arthur nodded carefully. That's what the evidence suggests. But Robert refused. Yes, so they kept pushing. Arthur leaned forward slightly. Christine, there's one more thing you need to understand. What Robert knew they might try again after he died. The words settled heavily in my chest. That's why he prepared everything we've seen tonight. The note, yes. The flash drive, yes. And the trust documents. Arthur nodded again. He built a legal wall around you. I stared down at the coffee cup in front of me. The surface of the dark liquid trembled slightly from my shaking hands. All these years, I whispered, I thought Robert handled everything. Arthur smiled gently. He did. But he also made sure you had the final say. My mind drifted back to the documents we had looked at earlier. Primary controlling shareholder, Christine Eleanor King. I'd signed those papers years ago. Robert told me it was for tax purposes, estate planning, nothing unusual. At the time, I barely read them. I trusted him completely. Now I understood. He wasn't just planning for retirement. He was protecting me. Arthur closed the laptop and slid the flash drive back into his briefcase. For now, we keep this safe. Shouldn't we go to the police? Arthur considered the question carefully. Eventually. Right now, we have evidence of fraud manipulation and attempted forgery. That sounds serious enough. It is. But if we move too quickly, they may destroy the rest of the evidence. My stomach tightened. You think there's more? Arthur nodded. Yes. What? The missing folder from Robert's desk. I felt that cold chill again. What if Daniel already has it? Arthur leaned back slightly in the booth. That's very possible, and if he does, then we need to know what's inside before we confront him. I rubbed my temples. Everything felt overwhelming. My husband had been fighting a battle I didn't even know existed, and now that battle had landed squarely in my hands. What would you do if you were me? I asked quietly. Arthur didn't hesitate. I would wait. For what? For them to make the next move. I looked up. They're already moving. Yes, Arthur said calmly, but they think you're still vulnerable. I thought about the conversation at the reception hall, the pressure, the urgency, the way Daniel insisted the paperwork had to be signed tonight. They're in a hurry, I said slowly. Exactly. Why Arthur folded his hands on the table. Because whatever they plan depends on timing. Timing banks, investors, contract deadlines, or control of the company, I said. Arthur nodded. If Daniel gains legal authority before the estate process begins, it becomes very difficult to remove him later, so he needed my signature tonight. Yes, but he didn't get it. No. Arthur smiled slightly. And that changes everything. I sat back in the booth trying to absorb everything we had discovered. Then a thought struck me suddenly. What about Lucas? Arthur looked surprised. What about him? He heard the arguments. He gave me the note. Yes, if Daniel suspects Lucas told me something, Arthur's expression grew serious. That's a fair concern. I felt my chest tighten again. Daniel wouldn't hurt his own son. Arthur didn't respond immediately. Christine, he said carefully, people rarely start with the intention of hurting their family, but sometimes they convince themselves they're protecting something bigger. The business, I said quietly. Exactly. The diner door opened suddenly. A cold gust of air swept across the room. Both Arthur and I turned instinctively. A man walked inside, just a customer. He took a seat at the counter. Arthur relaxed slightly. You're safe tonight, he said, but we still need to be careful. I nodded. What's the next step? Arthur pulled a small notepad from his briefcase. I've already contacted someone. Who? A private investigator. My eyebrows lifted. You're serious? Very. What's his name? Samuel Ortiz. The name sounded familiar. Former Chicago police detective, Arthur added. Now he handles complex financial investigations. And he can help us. He can track down the missing documents, review the financial records, confirm the medication history. And if he finds proof Arthur's voice became firm, then we take everything to the authorities. The weight of the situation settled deeper into my chest. I wasn't just dealing with family conflict anymore. This was something bigger. Fraud, manipulation, possibly even criminal negligence. Arthur? I said quietly. I need to ask you something. Of course. If Robert suspected Daniel and Ethan, why didn't he confront them directly? Arthur looked down at the table for a moment. Then he sighed, because he hoped he was wrong. The answer hurt more than I expected. Robert loved his children. Arthur continued. He didn't want to believe they were capable of crossing that line, but he still prepared all this. Yes. Arthur met my eyes, because loving someone doesn't mean ignoring the truth. I sat there silently, letting those words sink in. Outside the diner window, a police car drove past slowly, its blue lights briefly flashing across the glass. For a moment, the reflection illuminated the table between us. The empty coffee cups, Arthur's briefcase, the envelope of documents. evidence, protection. A war my husband had started quietly. And now it was mine to finish. Arthur checked his watch. It's almost 11, I blinked. The evening had slipped away without me noticing. Christine Arthur said gently, "You should go home." I hesitated. "You'll be all right there." "I think so." "And if Daniel calls, he will," Arthur said calmly. "What should I say?" Arthur smiled slightly. "Tell him exactly what he wants to hear. What's that you're still grieving, that you're overwhelmed, and that you'll think about the paperwork tomorrow?" I nodded slowly. And tonight, Arthur closed his briefcase. Tonight, he said quietly, "We make them believe their plan is still working." When I stepped out of Marlowe's diner, the night air felt colder than before. The neon sign buzzed softly above the door, casting red and blue reflections across the wet pavement. A light drizzle had begun while Arthur and I were inside, and the asphalt shimmered under the streetlights. Arthur walked with me to my car. "Drive straight home," he said quietly, "and don't stop anywhere. I won't. If anyone calls tonight, remember what we discussed. I'll act like nothing has changed." "Exactly." Arthur paused beside the driver's door. "Christine, you handled tonight better than most people would." I gave a faint smile. I didn't know I was capable of this. Arthur's expression softened. "Robert did." Those words lingered with me as he walked back toward his car. I sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. The clock on the dashboard read 10:58 p.m. Almost 11. The drive home felt longer than before. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror made my pulse jump slightly. But no one followed me. The streets were mostly empty by the time I turned onto our block. My house stood quiet at the end of the street. Dark. Still. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. For a moment, I simply sat there listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. Then my phone vibrated in my purse. I already knew who it was before I looked. Daniel. I took a slow breath before answering. "Hello, Mom." His voice sounded tense. "Where are you at home? You went back to the house." "Yes. You shouldn't be there alone. I'm fine." A pause followed. "Why didn't you come to our place?" he asked. "I needed some quiet. You could have had quiet here. I wanted to be surrounded by your father's things tonight." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I understand." But he didn't sound like he did. "Did you get home all right?" I asked. "Yes." Another pause. Then he said something carefully. "Have you thought any more about the paperwork Arthur's instructions echoed in my mind? Make them believe their plan is still working." "I told you," I said softly, letting my voice sound tired. "I'm not thinking clearly tonight. It's just routine, Mom. I know. It would really help if we could handle it quickly. I said I would think about it tomorrow." Silence. Then Daniel sighed. "All right." But again the words sounded forced. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "You too." He hung up. I stared at the phone screen for several seconds before lowering it. Then I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. The porch light flickered on automatically. Inside, the living room still glowed softly from the lamp I left earlier. The familiar warmth of the house wrapped around me again, but this time I noticed something else. The silence wasn't comforting. It was watchful. I locked the door behind me and walked slowly into the living room. Robert's chair still faced the television. His glasses still rested on the coffee table. I picked them up gently. "Robert," I whispered. My throat tightened. "You really did see it coming." I sat down in his chair and leaned back. The leather creaked softly under my weight. For a moment, exhaustion washed over me. The funeral, the diner, the evidence, the arguments. Everything felt like too much for one day. But Arthur had been right about something. Daniel believed his plan was still moving forward, and that meant tomorrow would be important. Very important. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Arthur. "Ortiz will begin reviewing the files tonight. I'll update you in the morning." Samuel Ortiz, the investigator. I hoped he was as good as Arthur believed, because if Daniel had already taken the missing folder from Robert's desk, then that evidence might disappear quickly. I stood up slowly and walked down the hallway toward the study again. The door was still slightly open. I pushed it wider and stepped inside. The room felt exactly the same as before. Bookshelves lined the walls. Robert's desk faced the window. The bottom drawer remained slightly open from when I checked it earlier. I knelt beside the desk again. The empty space between the folders stared back at me. One file missing, one piece of the puzzle gone. I closed the drawer gently and stood up. Then something else caught my eye. A small notebook sitting near the edge of the desk. Robert's handwriting covered the first page. My heart skipped as I picked it up. It was his personal planner. He used it for everything. Meetings, appointments, notes. I flipped through the pages slowly. Most entries looked normal. Business calls, lunch meetings, contract deadlines. Then I reached the page from 4 days ago, the day before Robert collapsed. 2 entries were written in darker ink. The first one read, 3:0 p.m. pharmacy call about medication refill. The second entry was written beneath it, and the words made my stomach tighten. Check security footage. Something not right. I closed the notebook slowly. Robert had known something was wrong even then. He was already investigating, already searching, which meant the argument in the kitchen that night wasn't the beginning. It was the moment everything finally exploded. I placed the planner back on the desk and turned off the study light. Then I walked upstairs. The bedroom felt colder than the rest of the house. Robert's side of the bed remained perfectly made, untouched. I sat down slowly. The silence pressed in again. For a moment I allowed myself to grieve, not just for the husband I had lost, but for the family I thought I had. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at my eyelids, but just as I lay down, my phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. I sat up immediately and opened it. The message was only one line. You should check your front porch. My pulse jumped. I got out of bed and walked quickly downstairs. The house creaked softly with every step. When I reached the front door, I hesitated. Then I opened it. The porch light illuminated the wooden floorboards, and sitting directly in front of the door was a manila folder. My breath caught. The same size as the missing folder from Robert's desk. I stepped outside slowly and picked it up. There was no one on the street, no car driving away, just the quiet suburban night. I brought the folder inside and closed the door. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were several documents, contracts, financial statements, and one handwritten note. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Robert's. The message was short, but it made my heart stop. If this folder disappears, it means I was right about them. For several seconds, I simply stood there in the entryway holding the folder. Robert's handwriting stared back at me from the small note clipped to the top page. If this folder disappears, it means I was right about them. The house felt suddenly colder. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Robert had anticipated this. He knew someone might take the folder from his desk, and he had prepared a second copy. But how had it ended up on my porch? And who had sent the message telling me to check outside? I closed the front door slowly and locked it. Then I carried the folder into the living room and set it on the coffee table. My hands trembled as I sat down and opened it. The first document inside was a financial report. I recognized the company logo immediately. King Construction Holdings, Robert's company. The company he had spent 40 years building from a single pickup truck and a handful of contracts. I flipped through the pages. Most of it looked like standard corporate financial information. Revenue reports, investment agreements, contract summaries. But then I reached the document near the center of the folder. A contract proposal. One I had never seen before. The title at the top read, Private Equity Acquisition Agreement. My pulse quickened. I read the first paragraph slowly. The agreement outlined a proposal from an investment group to acquire a controlling share of King Construction Holdings. The purchase price listed on the page made my stomach drop. $280 million. I leaned back in the chair, stunned. Robert had never mentioned anything about selling the company. Not once. I flipped to the next page. Several sections had been highlighted in yellow marker. One paragraph in particular caught my attention. Upon transfer of controlling authority, Acting Director Daniel King will oversee operational restructuring during the transition period. Daniel. My chest tightened. This deal had been built around him. I kept reading. The contract required the company's controlling shareholder to sign the agreement. The signature line at the bottom had 2 spaces, one for Robert King and one for Christine King. Me. My hands began shaking. If I had signed that temporary authority document tonight, Daniel would have gained legal control of the company. and within days he could have finalized this sale, the entire company, sold, without my knowledge. I stared at the numbers again. $280 million. For a moment, my mind tried to process the scale of it. Then another thought struck me. If Daniel and Ethan were planning to sell the company, why pressure Robert to sign anything? Why manipulate his medication? Why forge signatures? The answer came slowly, because Robert had refused, and if Robert refused, they needed him out of the way. I swallowed hard. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. The sound made me jump. "Arthur," I answered immediately. "Arthur, Christine, are you all right?" "Yes, I just received an update from Ortiz." My heart skipped. What did he find? He confirmed the pharmacy record. My stomach tightened. Ethan really picked up the medication, yes, and the dosage was doubled exactly like the receipt showed. I closed my eyes briefly. So Robert wasn't imagining things. No. Arthur paused. There's more. What Ortiz also checked the investor group behind that acquisition proposal Robert mentioned. The words made my chest tighten. What about them? They were scheduled to finalize negotiations within the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Everything was happening fast. Very fast. "Arthur," I said quietly, "I have something you need to see." "What is it, a folder?" "A folder, yes. The missing one from Robert's desk." Arthur inhaled sharply. "You found it? No. It was left on my porch." Silence filled the line. Christine. What I just got home about 15 minutes ago. Someone sent me a message telling me to check the porch. "Did you see who left it?" "No." "Is anyone else in the house?" "No." Arthur's voice grew serious. "Don't touch anything else inside the folder until I get there. You're coming here." "Yes." "Arthur, it's almost midnight." "I don't care." The firmness in his voice left no room for argument. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I looked back down at the documents spread across the coffee table. Robert's note still sat on top. If this folder disappears, it means I was right about them. My eyes drifted back to the contract. The acquisition agreement. $280 million. Suddenly, Daniel's urgency earlier made perfect sense. He didn't just want control of the company. He wanted to sell it. Fast. Before anyone could stop him. Before I understood what was happening. Before the estate process began. And if Robert refused to cooperate, he had become an obstacle. A dangerous obstacle. The sound of tires on gravel outside made me look toward the window. Arthur's car pulled into the driveway. Relief washed over me. I opened the door before he even reached the porch. He stepped inside quickly, rain dripping from his coat. "Show me." I led him into the living room. Arthur stopped short when he saw the documents spread across the table. His eyes scanned the pages quickly. Then he froze. "The acquisition agreement. You recognize it, yes." Arthur looked up at me. "Robert mentioned this deal during our last meeting. What did he say?" "He said Daniel was pushing for it." I felt my chest tighten, but Robert refused. Arthur nodded. "He believed the company would be dismantled if it went through." "What do you mean dismantled?" Arthur flipped to another page inside the folder. A section near the back outlined the restructuring plan. I leaned closer. My stomach dropped as I read it. The plan involved selling off major company assets, closing several long-standing projects, and laying off hundreds of workers. Robert built that company from nothing, I whispered. He knew what this deal would do. Arthur closed the folder slowly. And now we know why Daniel was in such a hurry tonight. I nodded. He needed my signature. Yes. Arthur looked toward the front door thoughtfully, which means whoever returned this folder wanted us to see the truth. Arthur's expression grew serious. There's only one person who might have taken it from Robert's desk. Daniel. Yes, but Daniel wouldn't return it. No. Arthur looked at me carefully, which means someone else in that house realized what was happening. My mind immediately drifted to one face. Lucas, the boy who delivered Robert's note, the boy who heard the arguments, the boy no one paid attention to. "Arthur," I said quietly. "Yes, I think I know who helped us tonight." Arthur and I stood in the living room for a long moment, the open folder spread across the coffee table between us. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, and somewhere in the house, a pipe creaked as the heating system kicked on, but neither of us moved. "You think it was Lucas," Arthur said slowly. I nodded. "It's the only explanation that makes sense." Arthur leaned over the table again and looked through the folder more carefully. These documents were taken from Robert's desk today, yes, and Daniel was definitely in this house earlier. He helped me organize some of Robert's papers yesterday morning, I said. Laura and Ethan both stopped by later in the afternoon. Arthur exhaled quietly. That means the folder could have been taken any time during the past 24 hours. But if Daniel took it, I said, why would it suddenly appear back on my porch tonight? Arthur shook his head. He wouldn't. Exactly. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark street. The rain had grown slightly heavier now, blurring the glow of the streetlights. Lucas's face appeared in my mind. The way he whispered to me at the reception. The fear in his eyes when he asked if I was angry with him. Arthur spoke again behind me. There's another possibility. I turned back. What someone inside Daniel's house found the folder and realized what it was? Margaret, I asked. Arthur considered it. Maybe. Daniel's wife had always been polite, careful with her words, rarely showing strong opinions about family matters. But tonight at the reception, she had stepped in when Daniel became too pushy about the paperwork. She had told him to let it go. At the time, I assumed she was simply trying to calm the situation. Now I wasn't so sure. Margaret loves Lucas, I said quietly. Arthur nodded. If she discovered what Daniel and Ethan were planning, she might have chosen to protect her son. A heavy silence filled the room. Then Arthur sat down in Robert's chair and folded his hands together. Christine, he said gently, we need to talk about what happens next. I walked back to the coffee table and sat across from him. Tomorrow, he continued, Daniel is going to contact you again. Yes, and he will likely push harder for that signature. He already sounded frustrated tonight. Arthur nodded. That frustration will grow. What do you want me to do? Arthur tapped the acquisition contract with his finger. You stall. For how long? Until Ortiz finishes tracing the financial trail. What exactly is he looking for? Arthur leaned back slightly. If Daniel and Ethan were preparing to sell the company, there will be emails, banking activity, communication with investors. Proof, yes. And once we have that proof, Arthur's voice hardened. We stopped them. The word stop hung in the air. It sounded bigger than I expected. How Arthur looked directly at me, legally. I nodded slowly. The trust structure Robert created gives you control, but Daniel doesn't know that. Exactly, Arthur leaned forward again. As far as Daniel is concerned, you're still a grieving widow who doesn't understand the business. A small, bitter smile crossed my face. He's been underestimating me my whole life. Arthur smiled faintly. Robert knew that. My eyes drifted back to the documents. The acquisition agreement, the restructuring plan, the layoffs. Robert had spent decades building something meaningful, not just a business, a community. Hundreds of families depended on those jobs. Daniel was ready to sell all of it for a quick fortune. The thought made my chest ache. He's not the boy I raised, I whispered. Arthur's voice softened. Greed changes people. I looked up. Did Robert ever say when he first suspected something was wrong? Arthur thought for a moment. About 6 weeks ago. That early. Yes. What happened? He noticed several internal company documents had been copied from the office server. By Daniel, we don't know for certain, Arthur said, but the access records were suspicious. I shook my head slowly. All of this started weeks before he died. Yes, and he was investigating it alone. Arthur nodded. He didn't want to accuse his own children without proof. The grief hit me again suddenly. Robert had been carrying all of this by himself, trying to protect the company, trying to protect me, trying to protect the family, and it still cost him his life. Arthur's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. Ortiz. He answered quickly. Yes, I watched his face as he listened. At first his expression stayed calm, then his eyebrows lifted slightly. What he said quietly. A long pause followed. Yes, he continued, that confirms it. Another pause. Send me everything. Arthur ended the call and looked at me. Well, I asked. Ortiz had found something. Yes. Arthur said slowly. What? He traced the investor group behind the acquisition deal, and it's not an outside buyer. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Arthur tapped the contract again. The private equity firm listed here. Yes, is partially owned by Ethan Parker. The words hit like a punch. Laura's husband, Arthur, nodded, And the remaining investors, 2 shell companies. Shell companies, companies that exist only on paper, my pulse quickened. Who owns them? Arthur exhaled slowly. We're still confirming that, but Ortiz suspects, yes, Daniel. The room felt suddenly smaller. Daniel and Ethan weren't just helping investors buy the company. They were the investors. They planned to acquire Robert's company themselves for $280 million, using my signature, using Robert's name, using everything he built. My hands clenched into fists. They were going to steal it. Arthur nodded. Yes. And if Robert refused? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The truth hung in the air between us. I stood up slowly. Tomorrow, I said quietly. Arthur looked at me carefully. Yes. Tomorrow, Daniel is going to come here expecting me to sign those papers. That's very likely. I picked up the acquisition agreement and stared at Daniel's name printed neatly in the transition clause. For the first time in his life, I said softly, "My son is going to discover he's been playing the wrong game." Arthur tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" I looked at him. "Robert didn't just prepare evidence. No, he prepared me." Arthur smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. He did. Sleep never really came that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for hours, the soft glow of the bedside clock slowly moving from midnight to 2, then 3, then 4 in the morning. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed the same images. Daniel standing in Robert's study, searching through the desk. Laura slipping into the room late at night. Ethan signing for Robert's medication. The acquisition contract. $280 million. The number echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. Greed. Arthur had been right about that, but the part that hurt most wasn't the money, it was the betrayal. Daniel was my son. I had watched him take his first steps in the living room downstairs. I had helped him build science projects at the kitchen table. I had cheered at his baseball games and comforted him when he broke his arm falling off his bike at age 12. Now the same boy had grown into a man willing to manipulate his own father and pressure his own mother for money. Just before dawn, exhaustion finally forced me out of bed. The house was quiet. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the air outside cool and clear. I made coffee in the kitchen the way Robert always did. Strong. Too strong if you asked me, but today it felt necessary. I carried the mug into the living room where the folder still sat on the coffee table. The documents looked exactly the same as they had the night before, but everything about them felt heavier now. Arthur had left around 1 in the morning after photographing every page and sending copies to Ortiz. Before he left, he said something I hadn't stopped thinking about. Tomorrow will tell us a lot about Daniel. He was right. Because today Daniel would make his move, and this time, I would be ready. At 8:30 in the morning, my phone rang. Daniel, right on schedule. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Good morning." "Mom." His voice sounded controlled, too controlled. "Did you sleep all right?" "Not really, that's understandable." A pause. Then he said it. "I was thinking maybe I could stop by this morning." "Here it comes." "That's fine," I said. "I'll bring the paperwork we talked about yesterday. I figured you might." "Good." Another pause followed. "I'll be there around 10. "All right." He hung up. I lowered the phone slowly. 2 hours. That was how long I had. I stood up and walked to the front window. The street looked peaceful in the early morning light. Children waited for school buses. Neighbors walked their dogs. Normal life continuing like nothing had changed. But inside this house, everything had changed. I walked back into Robert's study and sat down in his chair. For the first time since he died, I allowed myself to feel something other than grief. Resolve. Robert had trusted me to finish what he started, and I would. At exactly 9:42 a.m., Arthur called. "I have news," he said without preamble. "From Ortiz?" "Yes." "What did he find financial transfers?" My pulse quickened. "From where?" "From an account connected to Ethan Parker." "To the investor group?" "Yes." "How much money?" Arthur paused briefly. $25 million. I nearly dropped the phone. That's impossible. Apparently not. So Ethan and Daniel were already investing in the acquisition, yes. That means the deal was almost finalized. Arthur's voice grew serious. Christine, if you had signed those papers last night, the company could have been sold within days. I felt my stomach twist. And Robert knew that. Yes. What else did Ortiz find? Arthur took a breath. Email correspondence between Daniel and Ethan. Yes, about the deal and about how to convince you to sign. The anger that rose inside me surprised me. They planned it very carefully. I closed my eyes briefly. What about the medication? Ortiz is still reviewing the pharmacy records, but the double dosage is confirmed. Yes, that was enough. More than enough. Arthur spoke again. Daniel will arrive soon. I know. Remember the plan. I will. Stall him. I understand. And Christine, yes, if he pressures you, don't show him what you know. I won't. We ended the call. 10 minutes later, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart began beating faster. Through the front window, I saw Daniel's SUV. He stepped out alone. No Laura, no Ethan. Interesting. He walked up the path and rang the doorbell. I opened the door before the second ring. Mom, Daniel. He stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. You look tired, he said. I didn't sleep much. That's understandable. He glanced around the living room briefly. Still getting used to things. Yes. He placed the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. Several documents slid out neatly. There's just a few forms, he said. Nothing complicated. I sat down across from him. Explain them to me. Daniel blinked slightly. What? Explain the paperwork. His expression tightened. They're standard operational transfers. I'd still like to understand them. A moment passed, then he began speaking, but something about the way he explained the documents felt rehearsed. Careful. Like he had practiced the speech. Halfway through his explanation, I interrupted him. Daniel. Yes, who is Horizon Equity Group. His face froze, just for a second, but it was enough. Horizon Equity, he said carefully. Yes, I'm not sure what you mean. I leaned back in my chair. The investment firm trying to buy King Construction. Daniel's eyes sharpened instantly. What are you talking about? I reached for the folder on the coffee table and slid the acquisition agreement toward him. His reaction was immediate. Color drained from his face. Where did you get this? That doesn't matter. Daniel stared down at the contract like it had appeared out of thin air. This isn't finalized, he said quickly. That's not what I asked. His jaw tightened. Mom, I asked who Horizon Equity Group is. Silence filled the room. Finally, he said quietly, it's a potential investor. I nodded slowly. And Ethan Parker owns part of it. Daniel's head snapped up. You've been talking to someone. Yes, Arthur Bennett. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. For the first time since he arrived, his calm expression cracked. You shouldn't be involving him. Why not? Because he doesn't understand the bigger picture. I met his eyes steadily. Oh, I think he understands it perfectly. Daniel's voice hardened. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Am I? Yes. He pushed the paperwork toward me again. Just sign the transfer, Mom. His tone had changed. The politeness was gone. The pressure was back. I looked down at the papers, then back at him. And for the first time since Robert died, I smiled. No. The word hung in the air between us. No. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. He just stared at me across the coffee table like he had misheard. Excuse me, he said finally. I said no. His expression shifted slowly from confusion to disbelief. You're refusing to sign yes. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand across his jaw. You don't understand what this paperwork is for. I understand perfectly. No, you don't, he said quickly. You're emotional right now. You just lost Dad. That doesn't mean I'm incapable of reading a contract. His eyes flicked toward the acquisition agreement still lying on the table. You shouldn't have that document. Why not? Because it's confidential. A small laugh escaped me. Confidential from me. Daniel exhaled sharply. This conversation is getting ridiculous. Is it? Yes. He leaned forward again, pushing the transfer documents closer to me. Mom, listen to me carefully. I'm listening. If we don't finalize the authority transfer today, several contracts could collapse. That sounds dramatic. It's reality. No, I said calmly, it's pressure. Daniel's patience finally snapped. This company needs leadership. It has leadership. Not anymore, he snapped. Dad is gone. The words stung more than I expected. For a brief moment, grief tightened my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. That doesn't mean you automatically take over. Daniel stared at me. That's exactly what it means. No. Yes. He gestured toward the documents again, which is why you need to sign those papers. I shook my head slowly. Daniel, do you know who the controlling shareholder of King Construction is? His eyebrows furrowed. Dad was, yes. And now Daniel hesitated. That's what the estate process will determine. I picked up the trust document from the folder Arthur and I reviewed the night before. Then I slid it across the table toward him. Daniel frowned as he looked down. At first his expression showed simple curiosity, then confusion, then something else. Shock. What is this? He whispered. Read it. His eyes moved quickly across the page. The color slowly drained from his face. No, he said under his breath. Yes, this isn't valid. It was signed 4 years ago. Daniel's hands tightened around the paper. Dad never told me about this. That was intentional. He looked up at me slowly. You're saying, yes, the controlling interest of the company transferred to a trust. His voice sounded hollow. And the primary controlling shareholder is me. Silence filled the room. Daniel stared at the document again like it might suddenly change if he looked hard enough. This has to be some kind of mistake. It isn't. Dad wouldn't do this without telling me. Apparently he would. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. This changes nothing. It changes everything. No, it doesn't, he snapped. The company still needs operational leadership, and it will have it. Me. No. The second no hit him harder than the first. Daniel stood up suddenly. You can't run that company. I don't have to. Then who will? That's my decision. His eyes flashed with anger. You're being manipulated. By who? Arthur Bennett. I almost smiled. You're right about one thing. What I have been manipulated. Daniel paused. For years? The room grew very quiet. Mom? Do you want to know something interesting? I continued calmly. What the investor group behind Horizon Equity? Daniel froze. You've done some research on them, yes. Good, very good. Then you already know the company needs to move forward with the acquisition. Oh, I know exactly who owns Horizon Equity. His face hardened. And an Ethan Parker. Daniel didn't answer. And 2 shell companies, I continued. Still silence. And those shell companies are connected to you. Now he spoke. That's not illegal. No, it's business. No. What do you mean, no? It's greed. Daniel let out a short laugh. You think Dad didn't want the company to grow? I think Dad knew what this deal would do, which is what? Destroy everything he built. That's dramatic. Is it? I pulled another document from the folder and slid it across the table. Daniel glanced down. His eyes widened. The restructuring plan, the layoffs, the asset liquidation. 270 workers lose their jobs under this plan, I said quietly. They'll find other work. That's not how your father saw it. Daniel shook his head. You're thinking emotionally. No, I'm thinking exactly the way Robert did. Daniel stared at me for several seconds. Then his voice dropped. You've been talking to someone, yes. Arthur, yes. And who else? A few people. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means your plan isn't as secret as you thought. Daniel laughed again, but this time the sound carried no humor. You don't have proof of anything. Oh, I do. His eyes sharpened. What proof? I stood up slowly. Security footage from Robert's study. Daniel's expression flickered. Audio recordings. His jaw tightened. Pharmacy records. Now the color completely drained from his face. You're bluffing. Am I walked closer to him. You searched Robert's desk. Silence. Laura searched Robert's desk. Silence. Ethan picked up Robert's medication. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly. His anger suddenly exploded. You think Dad didn't push himself too hard. That's not what this is about. You think a slightly stronger dosage killed him. I think someone wanted him weak. Daniel stepped closer to me. That's a serious accusation. So is forgery. His breathing grew heavier. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, You should be careful with accusations like that. And you should have been careful with your father. The tension in the room felt like a stretched wire ready to snap. Finally, Daniel stepped back. You're making a mistake. No. Yes, you're choosing Arthur over your own son. No, I said softly. I'm choosing the truth. Daniel stared at me with something I had never seen in his eyes before. Not sadness, not disappointment, resentment. Then he grabbed his briefcase from the table. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It isn't. He walked toward the front door. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. You think you've won something today. I didn't say that, but you're wrong. His eyes burned with anger. You just started a war. The door slammed behind him. The house fell silent again. But this time, I didn't feel afraid. Because for the first time since Robert died, Daniel finally understood something. I wasn't the grieving widow he expected, and his plan had just collapsed. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house long after Daniel's car pulled out of the driveway. For a few seconds, I stood exactly where he had left me, staring at the empty hallway. My hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear, from the release of tension that had been building since the moment Lucas slipped that folded note into my palm at the funeral. Everything had led to this moment. The lies, the pressure, the missing folder. And now Daniel finally knew the truth. He didn't control the company. I did. I walked slowly back into the living room and sat down on the couch. The house felt strangely quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not the uneasy silence of the night before. This one felt clear, like a storm had just passed through. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Arthur, I answered immediately. Well, he asked. It happened. What happened, Daniel came by with the paperwork, and I refused to sign. Arthur exhaled slowly on the other end of the line. Good. I also showed him the trust document. A short pause followed. You did, yes. And his reaction? Shock. Anger, denial. Arthur chuckled softly. That sounds about right. He knows I'm aware of the acquisition plan. Another pause. That will make him nervous. Good, I said quietly. Arthur's voice grew more serious. Did you mention the evidence? Yes. All of it, security footage, pharmacy records, everything. Arthur let out another slow breath. That will slow him down. That's the idea. I stood up and walked toward the front window. Daniel's SUV was long gone now, but I could still feel the echo of his anger in the house. What happens next? I asked. Arthur's tone shifted into the calm, strategic voice I had heard the night before. Ortiz is finishing the financial trace today. And when he does, we will have documentation connecting Daniel and Ethan to the acquisition shell companies. And the forged signature, we already have enough evidence to open a fraud investigation. I nodded slowly. So it's over. Arthur hesitated. Not quite. What do you mean Daniel will likely try one last move? My stomach tightened slightly. What kind of move he might try to convince you to sell the company voluntarily? That won't happen. He might also try to intimidate you. That won't work either. Arthur chuckled softly again. Robert always said you were stronger than people realized. He should have told Daniel that. Arthur's voice softened. He knew you would discover it on your own. We ended the call a few minutes later. For a long time, I stood in the living room looking around the house. The sunlight had begun to fill the room, now casting warm light across the floor. It was the first clear morning since Robert died. I walked down the hallway and pushed open the door to his study. The room looked exactly the same. Books neatly arranged on the shelves. His chair still pushed slightly away from the desk. The small fishing photo of Robert and Lucas still sitting near the lamp. I stepped inside slowly. For a moment I simply stood there. Then I sat down in Robert's chair. The leather creaked softly beneath me. I placed my hands on the desk and let out a long breath. You really did prepare for everything, I whispered, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. For 42 years, Robert had carried the weight of the company, the decisions, the risks, the responsibility. Now that responsibility belonged to me, not because I wanted it, but because he trusted me with it. My phone buzzed again. A text message this time, from Margaret, Daniel's wife. The message was short. Thank you for protecting Lucas. I stared at the screen for a moment, then I typed back. Thank you for returning the folder. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then her reply arrived. He deserved to know the truth. I looked at the fishing photo again. Lucas standing proudly beside his grandfather, the only person in the house brave enough to deliver Robert's warning. I closed the study door and walked back downstairs. There was one more place I needed to go. An hour later, I stood in front of Robert's grave. The cemetery was quiet in the morning light. The grass still glistened with raindrops from the night before. I placed a small bouquet of white lilies beside the headstone. Good morning, I said softly. The wind moved gently through the trees. For a moment I imagined Robert standing beside me the way he always did, calm, confident, certain. "I figured it out," I whispered. A faint smile touched my lips. "You didn't make it easy." But then again, Robert never believed in easy solutions. He believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. I stood there for several minutes in silence. Then I said the words I had been holding back since the funeral. "I'm going to protect what you built." The wind shifted again, almost like an answer. When I finally turned to leave, the sun had risen fully above the trees, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something that wasn't grief. It wasn't anger either. It was peace. Because the truth had come out, Robert's legacy was safe, and the people who tried to steal it would face the consequences. But most importantly, I understood something now that I hadn't before. Robert hadn't left me alone. He left me prepared. Sometimes the greatest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trust the most, family, the people we believe would never hurt us. But grief has a strange way of revealing the truth. It strips away the masks people wear and exposes what was hidden underneath: greed, fear, ambition, and sometimes courage. In my case, the courage came from the most unexpected place. An 11-year-old boy who refused to stay silent when something felt wrong. Lucas reminded me of something important. Integrity doesn't come from age or power. It comes from character. Robert spent his life building a company, but the real legacy he left behind wasn't money or buildings. It was the values he passed down: honesty, responsibility, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it's difficult. Even when the people standing against you share your last name. If you've ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted, I'd love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if this story moved, you don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes the truth only reveals itself when we're brave enough to look for it.